are, I don't know, immunology. I don't know how she describes herself in that way. But I do want to point out that Meg is not just interested in cellular level things and below. She is also a biologist who concerns herself with the larger world of nature out there. She has been for some time now an important member of the Claremont's Wildland Conservancy, and that's what she's going to speak about today. The Wildlands Conservancy is a large organization. Claremont has a branch of it. She will be talking about both those, plus the current project of saving Clara Oaks. So Meg, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to screen share here if we can be successful with this. Now, can you see the opening screen here? Okay, we're in business then. Okay, Claremont Hills Wilderness Park, vision to reality. As Merrill mentioned, I'm a board member of the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy and also a member of the Friends of the Wilderness Park leadership team. And as I begin, I want to acknowledge the work of Arlene, Andrew, Terry Grill, and Lisa Peterson, 3 other board members, in putting together the basic research and the form of this presentation. 50 years ago, in 1972, 3,100 acres of undeveloped hillside land north of Claremont were in private hands. Today, 2,500 of those acres are within the boundaries of the park. So what I want to tell you today is the story of how this wilderness park was developed and how it expanded, and growing along with it, the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy and how our group has developed. So we'll hit 4 main points: the history of Claremont and the hillsides, the wilderness park's development and the organization, the creation of the Wilderness Park Master Plan, and, as Merrill mentioned, our current opportunity to preserve the Clara Oaks property. In the beginning, abundant hillside plants, trees, animals, and water enabled indigenous populations to flourish before the colonists came and displaced them. In the late 19th century, with the arrival of the railroad and the establishment of colleges and towns in the area, local students and residents started venturing up into the hillsides. The C.C. Johnson family, who had purchased hillside land, picnicked and hiked there. And the picture in the corner here shows a group of Pomona College students having a picnic on the C.C. Johnson land. This land, which we now call Johnson's pasture. Nearby property was owned by the Gale family, and they had a Angora goat ranch and sold goat milk for sale, as you can see here. Housing in the hillsides was initiated in 1925 by H.H. Garner, who developed the Padua Hills neighborhood. His plan was to build an elegant community for artists, not a honky-tonk sort of place, in his own words. And in 1930, he and his wife, Bess Garner, established the Padua Hills Theater, whose entrance is shown in this slide. Several large hillside parcels were annexed to the city in the mid-1960s. And a dense hillside development at the top of Mountain Avenue, named Claraboya, shown here on the little map to the right by the blue arrow, shocked Claremont residents with the realization that the hillsides could be covered with houses if something were not done to prevent or to at least regulate development. Claraboya, of course, now is a fine neighborhood, mostly mid-century modern homes with spectacular views, made all the more special by the fact that it's the only such neighborhood in Claremont. Johnson's pasture, immediately north of the Claraboya area, was destined to become Claraboya Phase 2. But in the mid-1970s, its owner, American Savings and Loan, attempted unsuccessfully to build 356 houses there. According to Judy Wright, Claremont historian, based on the zoning laws in the 1970s, our hillsides could ultimately have been developed with about 7,000 homes. So the first glimmer of an idea of parkland probably became in 1975 when the developers of Claraboya is shown here with the red arrow, and the developers of Claraboya deeded to the city 40 acres of open space in the Sycamore Canyon area here, north of Thompson Creek Channel and Trail, in exchange for building higher density in that area. The League of Women Voters played a major role, pivotal role, in moving the city to adopt regulations that would ultimately preserve hillside land. On the right is a picture of the cover of their 1977 study, Claremont Hillside Planning. And the League at this time looked at issues such as fire, water, seismic danger, costs and benefits of hillside development. And in typical League fashion, they looked at the pros and cons of things to consider and made recommendations for the Planning Commission and the Council to think about. In these pros and cons, they pointed out that although hillside housing would generate tax revenue, the cost of providing services such as police, fire, schools, street cleaning, etc., trash collection in a hillside area might exceed those tax revenues, and the city would end up, in fact, subsidizing the development. In 1977, the city adopted a natural environment element of the general plan, which established the foundations for hillside zoning, and they set up a task force to study how the regulations might be developed. The city hired 2 consultants to work with this task force, George Mader, who had been known for skill in preserving hillside environments, and a San Francisco attorney, Rossman, who was adept at knowing how to take a scheme that had developed, first of all, in New York City for transferring credits or rights of buildings from one area to another. The situation in New York City was this, that there had been zoning that would allow buildings to build to a certain height above where they were. Grand Central Station could have built on that site a skyscraper of a certain height, but the preservationists wanted to maintain this historic building. And so the concept was developed, the scheme whereby they could sell these air rights, the right to build higher in the space above them, to another property that could then exceed what would have been the zoning capability for it by adding that much more on top. And this was a financial transaction so that the donor property could gain from the relinquishment of these air rights, and the recipient property could gain by building higher ground. So this concept then was taken by Rossman to apply to land rights and the ability to build houses on property. They called it, instead of building rights, because they didn't think there should be a right to build houses on steep property, they called it transfer of development credits. And this concept was actually challenged several times in the courts, but it was taken all the way to the Supreme Court, where it was upheld. So the application in Claremont, whoops, wrong direction. The application in Claremont is as follows. George Mader looked at all of the different parcels that were in private hands, shown in the left-hand map here, and assigned, based on slope density consideration, assigned to them a certain number of development credits that they might have for that land. And then using the possibility of transfer of those development credits, the concept of clustering houses in particular areas that would be shallower, closer to roads, etc., and leaving wide swaths of open space undeveloped was developed with this transfer concept. Here's 3 major areas that we'll be considering as we go along. And this is just simply an example of a property that was designated with 38 houses, wanted to add a couple and could purchase them from a neighboring property whose credits would then be lowered to only 4 from 6. So this concept was written into the Hillsides Ordinance and is a legal establishment in the way Claremont manages the hillsides. But it's in fact been used only once, and that was the development of the Stone Creek neighborhood here along Baldy Road, which was developed as a cluster of houses to preserve open space in this large area around it. And the exact negotiations by which that happened, we'll talk about in a minute. But before we do, I just want to show you a few of the scenes of our Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. I don't know how many of you get up there and walk in it and are familiar with it, but we want you to understand why we value this land, why we think it's so special, we love it, and we think it's worth preserving and extending. So we'll look a little bit more closely at the development of the park itself. In 1980, about 1,400 acres of land, which had been owned by the Garner family, was bequeathed to Pomona College by Garner, who was a alum of Pomona. And that was in 1980, and 1981 was the time that the city of Claremont had adapted the Hillsides Ordinance Plan. So about the same time, the concept of open spaces, protected open spaces with just clusters of housing was in the minds of the city council and of Claremont residents. About a dozen years later, in the early 1990s, the concept became reality when negotiations between Pomona College for this land that it owned from the Garner family and the city of Claremont came into realization with the cluster development of the Stone Creek neighborhood. Now that sounds simple based on what we've said, but it actually took negotiations and falling in and out of agreement and problems for over a period of about 8 years for that to happen. But in the final event, the Pomona College bequeathed or gave to Claremont, city of Claremont, this 1,200 acres shown here in the dark black, which was the heart of our current wilderness park. In exchange for the help with the cluster, in exchange for money to begin with, Claremont actually bought the land from the college and started payment on it. But when payments broke down a little bit, they ended up with a negotiation whereby the city bought and gained this land in exchange for help with the Stone Creek cluster development of housing along Baldy Road here. While this map is up, I'll just point out to you the dark black is then what constituted the park in about the year 2000. Here's that little piece of Sycamore Canyon land just to the east of Claraboya that we talked about earlier. So that was the Stone Creek cluster development area in exchange for the Pomona land, which is shown here with the diagonal lines. The next major chapter in our story comes about with this sort of amoeboid shaped cluster of possible development of houses shown by the red arrow, which is the Johnson's pasture area. C.C. Johnson and his wife Louisa were the original owners of this land. We still call it by their name. And in 1950, Louisa died, and that land was sold to the Busgrove brothers for about $75,000. In 1960, they sold the lower slopes to the developers of Claraboya. But as we've talked about, here's Claraboya. Above Claraboya was additional Johnson land, what we call Johnson's pasture, which was thought about, designated in terms of becoming Claraboya Phase 2. A bankruptcy in the 1970s had prevented its development by American Savings and Loan. During the 1980s, it was sold successively to 3 different developers who tried to put houses on the land, but ran up against legal problems and challenged the transfer development credits unsuccessfully. And so the land had not been built on by about 1990. But at that time, with a strong economy, there was a new owner developer who was seriously interested in putting houses on this 180 acre parcel of land, probably between 125 and 250 houses. Here's just a view of the land through the path through Johnson's pasture. These eucalyptus trees actually planted by friends and family of the Johnsons in the early 1990s. So by the year 2000, there was a serious challenge that Johnson's pasture might be built upon and covered with this cluster of houses. And there was at that same time strong feeling in the city, in the city council, in the citizens of Claremont, that our wilderness, our hillside should remain open space. So in that year, 2000, the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy was founded by 3 women with the immediate goal of saving Johnson's pasture from development. And CWC, as I will refer to it, has evolved throughout the continued development of the park toward a broader vision, which is to preserve open space and have a green corridor across our hillsides all the way in the San Gabriel foothills. One of the founders of this, Suzanne Thompson, was the president of our CWC for about 10 years, and they formed a nonprofit organization, recruited members, collected money, et cetera, et cetera. So with this goal of the broader vision to preserve open space, in the early 2000s, 3 more parcels, shown here with the green arrows and in the sort of medium gray, were added to the park. So you can see that the patchwork is beginning to be filled in throughout this area. Again, these were done with the cooperation of Trust for Public Land, working with Claremont Wildlands Conservancy and the city of Claremont to negotiate with the owners, and paid for by grants that were obtained. But by the year 2006, Johnson's pastures was still endangered, and this became the subject of a couple of intense political campaigns that summer. One of them was the Parks and Pasture campaign. This was an attempt to pass a parcel tax on the citizens of Claremont in order to, it had both the goal of Johnson's pasture, adding that to the Wilderness Park, but also upgrading our city parks. So the slogan was, yes on Parks and Pasture. We had a booth in Memorial Park on the 4th of July. We marched in the parade. I see Karen Chapman-Lentz in the group here, and she was a very active member of this effort. And one of the most viewed examples or features in our booth was this map, an overlay map. We had a sort of a transparent overlay over the Claraboya region, onto which we glued about 200 little white houses to show what the hillsides would look like were development to happen. So this was a highly energetic campaign, but it failed. A parcel tax requires simple majority. We got only 44% of Claremont voting to save Johnson's pasture by that method. But it turned out that the opponents of the parcel tax still wanted to save Johnson's pasture. They just wanted to do it by a different method. And that method was a general obligation bond. And so on the November ballot that year was put this Measure S to save Johnson's pasture by a city bond. And there was, again, a large turnout of the Claremont community, this time all elements of the community working together, walking neighborhoods, standing in front of grocery stores, writing letters to the editor, holding fundraising events, etc., for Yes on S. And that, interestingly, which requires a 2/3 vote, got 71% of the vote by Claremont citizens. This is Suzanne Thompson, the woman I spoke about earlier, and the cover of the Courier celebrating the victory of that ability to then save Johnson's pasture from development. Okay, so marching along through time, the next major addition to the park was in 2011, and that was the Gale Ranch property. It's shown here. It's just to the east of Johnson's pasture. It's shown by the green arrow in this area. And you remember the Angora Goat Ranch. Well, that was the Gale family that had owned that property. It had, in fact, in the 1980s been sold to other owners a couple of times since. But working together with Trust for Public Land, Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, and the city of Claremont, we were able to get state money in order to purchase that land. So this is just a brief review of where we've been. The little additional, the first initial parcel of Sycamore Canyon, 40 acres in 75. The major land of about 1,220 acres, which forms both the heart of our current wilderness park, but also was key in establishing the principles involved with it, originally from Pomona College and paid for partly by the city in this way. The parcels that were added in the early 2000s, the Major Johnson's pasture parcel, which if those of you who are Claremont or who are taxpayers, property owners in Claremont, can look at your tax bill and see that we're still paying for that. And then the Gale Ranch property that we just spoke about. But before I talk about the last two little properties that have been donations, I want to mention a little bit about the master plan. Because by the year 2013, the park had become very popular. Here's a map that shows the trail system of the park. The main entrance to the Wilderness Park is the parking lot, main gate at the top of Mills Avenue here, shown by the green arrow. Here's another entrance to the park at the top of Claraboya. The red arrow shows a couple of trails that converge in Johnson's pasture, fire road that is here. And then there are other roads that connect together. But a primary popular feature is what's known as the loop, which is this kind of aggregation or put together string of 3 different bits of fire roads shown by the blue arrow. It's a 5-mile circuit with quite a bit of elevation gain involved in the process. And it's a popular site for runners and hikers and people who want to gain active exercise in that way. But by about 2013, the loop had become very popular and was starting to cause problems of various kinds. Realize that at this point, the park is just an aggregation of properties that have come together that are owned by the city and kept open, but without any active management. So there are problems with inadequate toilet facilities, trash collection, trash pileup, parking issues, etc. And the parking issues became extreme with the neighbors on the North Mills area, where people who were using the park may be arriving at 5 or 6 in the morning, slamming car doors, dropping trash, making noise in order to enjoy the park, were annoying those neighbors. The city dealt with these neighbor complaints at first by just successively closing off one street after another to parking and allowing only resident permit parking. But that piecemeal approach became inadequate. And so in about 2013, 2014, CWC particularly pressed the city to establish a master plan for active management of the park and dealing with some of these issues. And CWC worked with the city. City hired a consulting company. We worked to help organize community groups to discuss issues on it. We worked to run surveys of park users and to help the city in the writing of that master plan. And the ultimate solution was involved establishing paid parking lots and taking the revenue of those parking lots to then support active management of the plan. So here was the final draft of the master plan. It was approved by City Council in 2016, and it has three sort of central principles that are involved: the preservation of space, providing access, but minimizing also negative impact on neighborhoods. But the revenue has enabled us to establish a robust ranger program. And in fact, Trust for Public Land says that our park is about the best managed one in the San Gabriels. Also in that master plan was the recommendation of an establishment of a volunteer group, the Friends of the Wilderness Park. And we are a small core of people at this point, but we pick up trash and greet visitors and show them maps and consult with the city about signage policy, so forth and so on. Okay, returning just briefly to the last two little properties, which, as I suggested, were donations. One of them is this Evie Canyon property shown in green up here. And that, again, is land that was owned by Pomona College, but was donated in 2017 to become part of the Wilderness Park. And the last little bit is a 20-acre parcel, which is this little rectangular area pointed to by the red arrow, which was a donation from the Bertolino family in the year 2020. CWC helped negotiate that and also helped with the closing costs on that. But while this map is up, it's a good illustration of our hope, our dream of having a green corridor across our hillsides, because our wilderness park, shown here in the sort of yellowish green, abuts up next to Marshall Canyon Regional Park, sort of a bluish green, and the county areas, county lands that are protected in this area. And Bertolino, you will see, forms a nice bridge between those two. But you'll also note that there are a lot of white parcels here where the bridge connecting the greens and giving us this continuous wildlands across, we might hope would happen. These are still, the white areas are still in private hands, and CWSC is still concerned on targeting them. But of course, our current project has to do with this important piece of linkage ground, which is the Clara Oaks property. Now, here's just another way of looking at Clara Oaks. Here's our wilderness park with a light green showing the different parcels that have come together to form it. The county area in the blue here, and Clara Oaks shown in the red outline. So this property is just to the west of Claraboya and just north of the Webb schools. And while I have this little diagram up, I'll comment on the kind of strange shape of it. This slash across the northwest corner is actually owned by the LA County Fire Department. It's a debris basin in case of mudslides from burnt out hillsides. But water rushing and mudslides coming down would collect in that area. So it's not part of the property per se, but it's open space that will continue to be there. Okay, a little bit of history. In 2016, a developer named Randy Lim bought this property with the intention of building between 45 and 50 luxury homes on it. And he named that development Clara Oaks. After a couple of years of facing some of the problems of developing in this area, and also a less than enthusiastic Claremont community for building any more homes in this area, he offered it to the city and CWC as to be added to the Wilderness Park. And it was appraised at that time as being worth $7.2 million. And Randy agreed that that amount of money would cover his original cost and the costs he'd incurred since then, would be a fair price, and he would sell it to the city of Claremont to be added to the park for that amount of money. After a couple of years of negotiating, CWC entered into conversations with Trust for Public Land to try to see where and how we could raise that 7.2 million. And it looked pretty discouraging at first. It was going to be a heavy lift. And so in 2019, Randy decided that in order to protect his investment, he should go ahead with the entitlement process and see if it could be approved for development. That involves an environmental impact report, which is being studied right now, is in process. In the meantime, CWC continued with Trust for Public Land to try to raise the money and put in several grant applications to various sources to see if we could raise the money. But I will, before going into that particular aspect of it, I just want to tell you one of the major problems with this area, and that is it's been subject to fire damage in 7 of the fires that have occurred in this area in the last 100 years. Here in the yellow, of course, is the Clara Oaks property, and this is a fire in 1962. Here's the footprint of a fire in 1979. Here's the footprint of the fire most of us will remember in 2003, Padua or Grand Prix fire. And if you look at all of these together, the overlay of 7 wildfires that have occurred in the last 100 years, you can see that the Clara Oaks property is like ground zero. It's a literal hotspot in this area. So with that concern about wildfires, I want to look again at what Randy Lim plans for this area. Here's the Clara Oaks property, and here's the familiar map we've seen with these cluster areas. You notice in this lower cluster area, there's a little bulge that comes up into the lower L of the Clara Oaks property, and that's, of course, right where Randy Lim plans to put these 45 to 50 luxury homes. Notice also that 3 roads serve this, which converge into a single road. That road empties out into Webb Canyon Road at the red arrow. So let's take a drive up Webb Canyon Road. First of all, you come to a sign that says danger, extreme fire hazard area, and then subject to flooding, and then road narrows, watch opposing traffic. And here's the narrow road that goes over a curve and across a private bridge here. And then you realize that both sides of this road is lined by heritage live oaks, which are a protected species, but which would have to be sacrificed were that road widened. On the other hand, if that road were not widened, you can imagine what individual cars trying to evacuate from Claraboya would face of a major fire engine coming north on that road when they're trying to drive south on that road. But instead of just focusing on the negative aspects of development, let's talk about some positive aspects of preservation. Paul Faustich, who's a professor of environmental studies at Pitzer College, has set up motion-activated cameras in the area, and there's abundant wildlife in the Clara Oaks area, which we think is worth saving. So CWC continues to work with Trust for Public Land in applying for grants. However, most of the grants require evidence that the community is in favor of it, that there's buy-in from the locals for this. So in last September, the Wildlands Conservancy donated or set apart, pledged $75,000 of our funds, the bulk of our savings and funds, to a campaign challenging the city of Claremont, the residents of Claremont, to match that $75,000 in either pledges or donations. Here's a flyer that was included as an insert in the Courier. And here's this lovely t-shirt that was designed by the Folk Music Center, Ellen Harper there, and is available for people who donate $50 or more to the campaign. So we challenged the community, and the response has been absolutely fabulous. Here's the $75,000 of our pledge initially, but the donors from the community of Claremont by now, and this is updated last weekend, it's brought up to date every week, have given outright donations totaling close to $95,000, with another $45,000 or so of that in pledges. These pledges would become due at the time of escrow if we're successful in saving the ground. So we're absolutely thrilled with the response of Claremont. In addition to that, if you look just at the lower part of this for the moment, the city of Claremont, in making a decision about what to do with surplus budget funds a year ago, has pledged 300,000 of that surplus money to park expansion. So that plus our $75,000 pledge and the something over a little bit over 140,000 from the community gives us over $500,000 to show these granting agencies that we in fact are all in favor of buying this land, preserving the open space. And in fact, we've been successful in a couple of the grants we applied for. Rivers and Mountains Conservancy gave us $3 million, and the California Natural Resources Agency, from an environmental mitigation program, gave us another million for that. So we have in hand about $4.5 million toward that 7.2 million, and there are other grant possibilities that we're working toward. Before I leave this point, I just want to say that our state senator, Anthony Portantino, whom many of you know and have worked with, was totally pivotal in helping us get this Rivers and Mountains Conservancy money. He apparently attended the board meeting and made a strong pitch for them to give this money. So we're very grateful to him for that. So in closing, here is just another view of the Clara Oaks property and some of the wildlife on it. We think that adding this to the Wilderness Park will help preserve it from development, protect the native vegetation and wildlife, help form that continuous wildlands corridor on the hillsides, and prevent building homes on dangerous fire-prone land. And as we look back, I just want to stress one aspect of it. One theme that stands out strongly to me is the very strong role that the Claremont community has played in all of this. The original efforts in the 2000s to come together to save Johnson's pasture were a strong community effort. The development and writing of the master plan involved a lot of community activity and community meetings, and people coming together to discuss it and talk about it. And this recent fabulous response that we've seen from the community in terms of donations and pledges to purchase Clara Oaks just give evidence of the fact that Claremont's a wonderful community to live in, and we're very grateful for the support for the Wilderness Park throughout this last 50 years. So that concludes my comments, and I'll be glad to respond to any questions or comments that you all have.
Okay, everybody, let's give a round of applause to Meg Mathies for her presentation. And we'll have a few moments now for questions. I think Ivan wants to say something. So Ivan, how about if you go first? Those of you who are able to raise your hands, Meg, do you want to continue sharing your screen, or do you want to just see all of us now?
I could probably go back to gallery view. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it that way. That's better. Then I can see people's faces. Good idea.
Meg,
Ivan, go ahead. You're up.
Wonderful. I think your presentation was really very informative and appreciated greatly. I want to say that I am a regular user up there, and I have been for 30 years hiking up there. And so I could like to speak about it very briefly from a slightly different point of view, not simply from, quote, preservationist or biological diversity, valuable as these things are, nor the watershed, which you didn't mention, which is needless to say.
It's another factor.
But I'm up there now all the time, and I have seen this park being used. Now we live in, and it is used. People are up there hiking, and I am constantly amazed at how tidy they are. There's a lot of people go through there. They are people of all socioeconomic levels, all racial, ethnic groups, and they are really tidy. You rarely find a paper cup on the ground, and if you do, somebody picks it up. I'd like to point out that having been up there for a long time, I've seen the usage increase. And I see a lot of fat people up there now who I didn't used to see up there. And I think it's because the word has gotten out. If you want to avoid diabetes, which is at epidemic levels in our country, you need to exercise. And a lot of people in the working class are out there doing just that. And they may not be able to afford $150 a month for a for a health club or the Claremont Club, whatever that is now called. But they can go up there and hike around there, take that loop around for 5 miles and lose 5 pounds while strengthening their circulatory system. It's really an extremely valuable health addition to our community. Thank you very much. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Ivan. I appreciate the comment. I will say that the original presentation was a little bit longer than this one, and Chris asked me to condense it a little bit so we have more time for discussion. And a couple of the slides that I left out in that were slides that show the diversity of park users. When we did the survey in 2013, it's something like less than 18% of the park users surveyed out of 2,000 or so surveys at that time were from the 91711 zip code. And that means over 80%, 82% were from other surrounding zip codes. And many of those surrounding zip codes contain disadvantaged areas that are lower socioeconomic and park poor regions and so forth. And it really illustrates the fact this is a city park owned by the city of Claremont, but it operates as a regional park. And I agree with you. Whenever I go up, I'm just thrilled with the diversity of people of all shapes, sizes, types, who use the park, who enjoy the park, and who take care of the park. I agree with you on that. So thank you very much.
Anybody else, please raise your hand, preferably electronically. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I'll see you. Merrill, I see your hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, this is just a follow-up point, Meg. Given that this is a regional park and not just a local park, has there been any attempt or any thought given to trying to get other communities, other zip codes in the region to contribute?
Yes, we work on that, although the adjacent areas, Laverne has some protected area in it. They're not as interested in active management in that level, but we continue to work with them. We have a external relations committee that tries to build those bridges. And also many of the granting agencies that we apply to have looked favorably upon opportunities for people in less advantaged communities to do it. And so that's one of our big selling points when we apply to those types of granting agencies, to really point out the fact that we operate in a much broader sense. So we're aware of it. We try to use it wherever we can.
I have a question if no one else does. Oh, go ahead, Mel. Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, I was unmuted and then I had to unmute again. Meg, a wonderful presentation. And I must say, I saw a similar presentation at the League of Women Voters, and Meg has covered the parts of presentation made by 3 people at the League. She was batting all positions today, and it was a very well told story. This campaign is still ongoing. Is that right, Meg? And where can people donate?
Absolutely. It's still ongoing. At the moment, we're trying to obtain an option from the developer so that he would sell only to us, and that while we wait for the environmental impact report, we have the price of 7.2 million may be a little bit fluid right now. If the entitlement process were to go through, saying that this land could be developed, we think the value would go up to closer to 15 million. On the other hand, if the environmental impact report comes back pointing out the number of problems in developing this land, the price might be less than 7.2. He might be willing to negotiate differently. So we're in the middle of those negotiations right now, but we're still raising money. We still want your support. We also want your support in terms of going up to the wildlands and enjoying it and joining our volunteer Friends of the Wilderness Park. You can support in lots of different ways. If you want to support financially, we have a website, ClaremontWildlands.org, and there's a donation button on it. Or you can also go down to the Folk Music Center and give them $50 or more and get one of these beautiful t-shirts. So yes, we want
the
the
link in
money,
the
but
chat.
it's more than just money. It's support at a lot of different levels. But thanks, Mel.
Okay, and then I thought I see Mike's hand, but I thought someone else had. Cass, your hand was up
Yeah.
before.
It-
Would you like to
it
ask a
was-
question?
I was just going to mention that the park was not ever so. After they put in, and I was going to ask Meg if the porta potties are open yet on the trail.
I'm not sure.
Is that
They
I
are.
don't,
They're open.
up on the
Okay.
trail, not just at the parking lot, but at the
Yeah.
trail.
Yes.
I am no longer
Okay.
able to hike that loop physically, so I don't check out on
Oh.
what's going on along the way.
Mike,
Great.
Thank you, Meg. That was just a fantastic presentation. And being someone who came to Claremont in the 90s to go to school and ended up staying and gradually became more aware of the goings on here, I just really appreciate all the background, and that makes me feel that much more connected to the community and the wilderness area as well. One thing that I just wanted to interject, and this may be more rhetorical than anything. I don't know if you would have information on this, but as to the value, you said if the EIR came back saying that it was a property that could be developed, that the value of that property would go up, if I remember correctly. But I grew up in Northern California in Chico, and right next to Paradise. And Paradise, as you know, in the campfire was
Got burnt out.
pretty much wiped out. And, I still have a lot of friends up there and family. And, that rebuilding process there has been hampered by insurance. With the stunning diagrams that you presented with, that Clara Oaks area being sort of a hotspot for all of the fires that have gone through this area in the last 100 years, it would seem that for homeowners and developers to get insurance to build there would be prohibitive, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, what you say makes sense to me, and my thought would be that's the direction that it's going to go, but I don't know for sure. Incidentally, while you were speaking, I thought about a response to Mel's comment when he said that I had done what 3 other presenters had to do in the original version of this. Those 3 presenters are the ones who did all the background research, organized it, put this together, from which I drew. So all credit to them for the factual material and the development of the thought. I just polished it a little bit and condensed it a little bit.
Meg, I've got a question for you. Before people go, in case people need to leave at the hour, I just want to drop in a link in the chat. That's a membership link. If you need to renew your membership or you need to join the club, that's how you can do it. You can do an individual membership for not much money. It's like $30. So please consider joining the club if you haven't joined already. Here's my question, Meg. My question concerns Evie Canyon. It's nice to see that there's been that purchase. It's a very popular way to summit Potato Mountain, and I've hiked that way and exited that way too. But the parking situation there is pretty horrible. They don't allow parking at the trailhead anymore just because
That's
there's been repeated car break-ins. But then there was a lot that they opened, they closed, they're redirecting. So can you say a little bit about what the expected future is for EV Canyon, particularly at the trailhead?
Very good question, Chris, and one that we're grappling with. Because of the traffic on Baldy Road, because of inadequate parking, because of traffic safety issues from people who park in one area and then walk along the roadway to get in there, all of those areas have now been closed off. And the only way to access EV Canyon and really enjoy it is from the Mills entrance all the way across, which means that you've hiked 5 or 6 miles before you ever get to that area. We're working on it. We have a committee, a small committee from the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, people who are very concerned about that, trying to explore different ways to establish an access point off the Baldy Road area. But the city has done engineering studies and has looked at the issue, and there are just too many problems right now, and it would cost an immense amount of money to put in the appropriate parking lot and safe entrance at that point. So at the moment, we are being content that it is open land, protected land, not going to be developed on land, and pleased with that aspect of it. But Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, we care about preservation, but we also care about access for passive recreation. So we do have a committee trying to brainstorm and explore different ways of dealing with that. I can't give you any assurance that it's going to be done in a small number of years, but we certainly hope that we can solve that problem. We're very aware of it.
Okay, thank you. And Enrica, and then Arlene.
One quick question.
Yeah, me or
Yeah,
Yeah, Henrika.
Ricky. My name
Ricky.
Ricky,
getting
got it.
messed up, and they I don't know, but anyway, there's something I don't understand. You mentioned the 2 different votes to save Johnson's pasture, and the first one was a tax. We'll all pitch in. That's what taxes are for.
Partial tax.
Partial tax, which I guess is another little detail. But then what finally passed was a bond issue. Now, does that mean that somebody lent the money and then the city is paying it back? In other words, is somebody making money off of doing it that way? Which is what it looks like to me. Can you explain that?
I'm not totally up to date on that, but I see Arlene Andrew here. Arlene, can you help us out?
Well, on that, the parcel tax, as it wasn't, I think only owners of property were to be.
That's it.
Yeah, but then the bond, it is on our property tax bill, the bond, and yeah, they sold bonds, and whoever bought the bonds is getting the interest from the bonds, so it has to be paid for somehow. And
that's what I thought, and I don't know now who was buying. I mean, there was an issue.
Anybody who
It's a general obligation. Yeah, it's a general.
yeah,
all right,
people in Claremont who bought the bonds just to be supportive, and they're getting, I don't know, 3% or something like that on them.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Draw your own conclusions, but it seems to me the parcel tax, okay, so it would only have been paid by the homeowners, and of course, we are told how wonderful we are that we are homeowners, that renters, bad.
Yeah, no, the parcel tax, only the owners could vote, I believe, is how that one worked, and that's why people were. You know what?
But
something
who
I have to
paid
get back
it?
to remember.
But no, I mean, in other words, we have the goal, we want the pasture, and then it makes you it's perhaps a tangential issue how we finance things in this country, and it all too often seems that somebody makes money off of
Yeah.
it.
Well, it was a tangential issue, but it's the one that tipped the scale for success in the result. Yeah.
I know this is where we are, that we have no alternative.
And it was,
We're capitalist society.
but it
I
won
know.
by, the yes vote was something like 72%, whereas the other one was under 50%.
That's what Meg said, but
Yeah.
wilderness, yes, capitalism, no.
I think Arlene had another comment.
And it was a clarification that I can't remember because my mind went someplace else. Oh, my goodness. About the, I know. The city council hears from people about the EV Canyon access. It's not just us.
Good.
It needs to be pressing the council to come to some kind of a conclusion and fix this problem. But hearing from the grassroots is always a good way to go.
Good point.
Thanks, Arlene. And I'll turn it over to Merle in just a moment, but I'll also add that through years of reading the Police Blotter and the Courier, you know that there are about 2 break-ins at EV Canyon Trailhead every week. Right?
Always.
And that's
Yeah.
before they change the parking lot there and before they put a camera, or even after they put a camera in. Merle, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention to Ricky, this issue about whether a general obligation bond or a parcel tax is the appropriate way to pay for things. It came up about the police department. It will come up every time. How is best to pay for this? And by and large, parcel taxes are frowned upon by people who own the houses. They want to spread the pain.
I know.
And the
then
gain.
Okay,
spread the
thank you,
pain,
Merle.
not the gain.
Anybody else? Going once? Karen, go ahead.
Hello? Meg, I was so pleased to hear your wonderful story of all this because it's been part of what I loved. And
You're part of that story, Karen,
well,
historically.
well, it was just wonderful to be there, and I'm so glad that you're there down now and all you've done for a long time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's about time. We could wrap up. Let's give a nice round of applause once again to Meg for her presentation today. I learned so
thank
much
all of you.
today being I wouldn't say a new Claremonter, but a lot of background that I didn't know. I came here when the Johnson pasture battle was beginning to heat up. So that was that was my history with it. But like Ivan, I'm up there frequently walking around, and I just love what the city and the volunteers and the Conservancy are doing for that. It's really great.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we sign off, I just wanted to remind everybody that if you are interested in joining the endorsement interviews on Tuesday night, March 22nd, we're still figuring out the time, but the duration will be 2 to 4 hours. You don't need to commit to the whole time. Basically, we have a committee that's going to be conducting the interviews, but the public and the membership is invited to observe. Put it on your calendar, or if you put your name in the chat, I'll make sure you'll get on the email lists for reminders and the like. The other thing I'll mention briefly before signing off, because I need to run to my 1 o'clock meeting myself, is that we're also finalizing the legislative priority list. You all have a voice in shaping what the final list looks like. We're going to make a proposal to the executive committee next week, and then after that, we'll bring it forth to the general membership at our March 28th general membership meeting. And the specific categories of which we're trying to identify individual items of legislation are taken from the legislative interest survey that was sent out at the end of December. So it's meant to reflect your interest, the membership's interests, and we'll go from there. So with that, I'm going to sign off and say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for coming today, and we'll see you hopefully on March 28th. Take care now. Bye.
Yes.